Chapter 13. Chapter 13, Trial Tower. Jian Wushuang walked out of the cultivating room and saw Elder Hong waiting outside. Seeing Jian Wushuang, Elder Hong could not refrain from showing astonishment. He felt that Jian Wushuang had changed a lot in terms of his strength. Jian Wushuang did not voluntarily release his aura of spiritual power, so Elder Hong could not figure out his exact cultivation. However, he knew that Jian Wushuang must have made great progress in the cultivation room. It seems that our young pavilion master has made big strides lately, Elder Hong said smiling. Yeah. Jian Wushuang nodded and asked, Elder Hong, what's the matter? Here's the thing, Elder Hong replied. The trial tower has opened again today. If you want to join the fight, you should try. Trial tower? Jian Wushuang was intrigued by this information. Trial Tower was a 7-story building made for testing cultivation and martial arts techniques. The higher the floor, the more difficult the test. It was usually closed, except for the month before the year-end battle each year. The Trial Tower test could be regarded as a preliminary battle. After all, the annual Sword Marquis Token Battle was the most significant event in Sword Marquis Mansion. Every year, the mansion would invite influential masters from within the Bashui prefecture. To ensure a good performance for the masters, the participating disciples had to pass the trial tower in advance. At a minimum, only disciples who had reached the 5th story of the 7-story tower were qualified to participate in the battle. Therefore, Jian Wushuang had to pass this test in the trial tower if he wanted to participate in the battle. I am leaving for Nine Wolves Mountain soon, and I will stay there for 1 month. Since I have to get the entry qualification for the battle, I have to take this chance at the trial tower and pass the test first. Jian Wushuang thought to himself. It would be a piece of cake for him to pass the trial tower test. Once he made up his mind, Jian Wushuang went directly to the trial tower. Trial tower stood erect in the very center of a huge courtyard. It was a gigantic tower, more than 33 meters high. At that moment, there were a lot of disciples in front of the huge tower. Look, the 6th gem has been lit. Cousin Jian Lin has passed the 6th story. Cousin Jian Lin is really awesome. How would you know? Cousin Jian Lin broke through the 6th step of the spirit path long ago. He has reached the peak of the 6th step. With his cultivation of spiritual power, it's a cinch for him to pass the 7th story, never mind the 6th story. Look, the 7th gem has already been lit. Several disciples stared at the 7 gems in front of the tower gate. Each gem corresponded to 1 story of the trial tower. After passing 1 story, a gem would be lit up. If all 7 gems were lit up, it meant that all 7 stories had been passed. It must have been that Jian Lin, who had reached the peak of the 6th step of the spirit path, was going to pass all 7 stories. Soon after, the tower gate opened once again. The cyan-clothed Jian Lin walked out slowly, with a confident smile. Noticing the envious glances from the surrounding disciples, he was extremely proud of himself. Jian Lin has passed the 7th story. He is qualified to participate in the Sword Marquis Token Battle. In front of the tower gate, an elder from Red Marshal Hall wrote his name down rapidly, and then looked around, saying next. Many disciples hesitated. It was hard to pass the trial tower test. If one wanted to pass the 5th story, he needed to have a spiritual power cultivation of the 5th step of spirit path. Moreover, if they wanted to take part in the battle, he had to be under 16. In the mansion, the number of disciples who could satisfy these 2 conditions was only modest. With so few qualifiers and so many bystanders, one would feel embarrassed if they took the test but then failed to even pass the 5th story. Let me have a try. As a voice rose, a young figure slowly came over. He had a long sword behind his back. Many disciples looked at him. They were astonished when they recognized him. Is it him? Jian Wushuang? Jian Wushuang of the Sword Pavilion, was he the one who just spoke? How could he possibly pass the trial tower test? Everyone was in disbelief. As the son of the last Sword Pavilion master, Jian Wushuang had a special identity. Furthermore, he was universally recognized as trash in the mansion, because he had not been able to gather spiritual power. Therefore, all the disciples in the mansion knew him. For this reason, They were extremely skeptical when he decided to attempt the test of the trial tower. In addition to the disciples, the note-keeping elder of Red Marshall Hall could not help raising his head with surprise in his eyes, asking, "You want to take the test in trial tower?" "Can't I?" Jian Wushuang looked indifferent. "Of course, you can. As long as you are a disciple of the mansion under 16. The elder nodded, saying, "Please go in." "Thank you." Jian Wushuang went directly into the tower, ignoring the multitude of eyes upon him. Just as he ascended the steps, a voice that was obviously unfriendly rose from the side. "Jian Wushuang, how dare you come here to take the test? You overestimate yourself." Jian Wushuang paused and glanced coldly at Jian Lin, who glared at him with contempt. Without a word, he continued to walk toward the trial tower. Soon, he was inside the tower. When he saw this, Jian Lin slightly turned the corner of his lips. Trash like you is so arrogant. Wait and see, you will be embarrassed later." "Cousin Jian Lin, do you think Jian Wushuang can pass the 5th story?" a disciple of Red Marshall Hall asked. "Him?" Jian Lin responded with a sneer. "To pass the 5th story one must have a cultivation of the 5th step of Spirit Path. He reached the 3rd step of Spirit Path more than half a month ago. Now, he might have reached the 4th step of Spirit Path at most. Even if he is the son of the last Sword Pavilion Master and possesses outstanding swordsmanship, it is still idiotic nonsense for him to pass the 5th story with a cultivation of the 4th step of the Spirit Path." The surrounding people all agreed with him. More than half a month ago, he had just reached the 3rd step of the Spirit Path. How strong could he be now? He might have reached the 4th step of the Spirit Path at most. How could he possibly pass the 5th story in the trial tower? What a joke. Humph, he is asking for grief. Jian Lin sneered. He expected that Jian Wushuang would disgrace himself in front of everyone. Chapter 14. Chapter 14, Fighting in Trial Tower. On the 1st floor of Trial Tower. Looking at those 3 tall figures standing in front of him, Jian Wushuang knew they were humanoid puppets, which were unique to Trial Tower. They were opponents that he needed to confront. Trial Tower, a place where cultivation and martial arts techniques are assessed. In general, anyone whose cultivation reaches the 6th step will complete 7 levels in total. Even those who have outstanding martial arts techniques at the peak of the 5th step may get to the 7th level as well. Therefore, I am curious about how far I can go using only my swordsmanship and not using any spiritual power. Jian Wushuang thought secretly. "I am ready." After saying that, Jian Wushuang waved the long sword in his hand. Wow! Instantly, condensed sword essence directly erupted like roaring waves. Sword Tide. Jian Wushuang yelled with wildness in his eyes. Sword Tide was a deadly move from a first-class sword art, ceaseless waterflow sword art. And it was wielded at its best by Jian Wushuang. After some simple movements, a sword shadow swept over the room. Those 3 humanoid puppets instantly fought back. However, being at the entrance level, they were much weaker than Jian Wushuang. Even if Jian Wushuang did not use his spiritual power, he could defeat them easily with only his quick and forceful swordsmanship. The 1st level passed. Outside Trial Tower, the 1st gem lit up, which meant that he made it through the 1st level. The disciples around it did not feel surprised. Humph! Only the 1st level. With his cultivation in the 3rd step of Spirit Path, he should easily pass through the first 3 floors. And completing the 4th level is also possible. However, it is an idiot's daydream to think that he will complete the 5th level. Jian Lin's face was still full of contempt. Not long after the 1st gem had lit up, the 2nd one lit up and, soon after, the 3rd one followed. All intervals were short, which meant that it did not take Jian Wushuang too much time to defeat those humanoid puppets on each floor. However, it was only after a long interval that the 4th one lit up. He stayed on the 4th floor for a long time, so he obviously spent a lot of time battling hard with the humanoid puppets there. As for the 5th floor, the humanoid puppets are much stronger than the ones downstairs. There is no chance for him to win. The 4th level must be his limit. Haha, I knew it. Trash like him, how can he pass through the 5th level of Trial Tower? Many disciples around sneered and booed. They thought Jian Wushuang had given his all to make it through the 4th level. Otherwise, why would he have been held up for such a long time? Jian Lin especially sneered again and again, smiling sardonically, and could not wait to make fun of Jian Wushuang when he walked out of Trial Tower. On the 5th floor of Trial Tower, Jian Wushuang's face appeared was grim. After each level, the strength of the humanoid puppets greatly increase. I easily completed the first 3 levels with swordsmanship only. However, on the 4th level, I went through a tough battle and it took a long time to defeat them. Therefore, on the 5th floor, it will be impossible to defeat them with swordsmanship alone. Let me use spiritual power. Jian Wushuang stretched the sides of his mouth upward, then spiritual power burst forth in a flash. If disciples outside Trial Tower knew that Jian Wushuang completed the first 4 levels with only his swordsmanship, it would have scared the pants off of them. In general, a warrior who wanted to pass the 4th level of Trial Tower at least needed to be in the 4th step of the spirit path. However, he had gotten through it without using spiritual power. In other words, his martial arts technique was well matched with cultivation of warriors in the 4th step of the spirit path. It was incredible. Once his spiritual power, which was nearly at the peak of the 6th heaven of divine path, burst out, it was much easier for Jian Wushuang to fight against those humanoid puppets. The disciples outside Trial Tower, including Jian Lin, were waiting to see how Jian Wushuang would bring shame upon himself. But, just then, the 5th gem by the door of Trial Tower lit up. Upon seeing that, the disciples were suddenly astonished. It meant that Jian Wushuang had gotten through the 5th level. How could this be? Impossible. He took such a long time on the 4th level. Clearly, he completed that with great difficulty. So, how could he get through the 5th level? Does this mean that Trash has reached the 5th step of the spirit path in his cultivation? All of their faces were full of disbelief and astonishment. Jian Lin was even more astonished with a wide-open mouth but did not know what to say. However, that was just the beginning. Before they could react, the 6th gem lit up. The 6th level. Having seen that, all of the disciples who were gathered there held their breath for a second. Then, after less than 15 minutes, the last one also lit up instantly. All 7 gems, each embodying 1 floor of Trial Tower, had lit up. It meant that Jian Wushuang had completed all of them. Silence. Outside was deathly silent. All the people on site looked at those 7 sparkling gems in disbelief. They had never been in such a state of shock before. The 7th level. He made it through the 7th level? Jian Lin was dumbstruck. Actually, he swore that Jian Wushuang was, at most, only at the 4th step of the spirit path before he had gone into Trial Tower. To scrape by the 4th level was lucky for him. There was no chance for him to make it through the 5th level. But what was the reality? The 5th level? Jian Wushuang had not only passed through the 5th floor, but he also passed through the 6th and the 7th. He had passed through all 7 floors of Trial Tower. Now, he was as strong as him. Impossible. This is by no means possible. Jian Lin shook his head fiercely. He could never believe that this had happened. While all of them were in shock, they did not notice that Jian Wushuang had walked out of the Trial Tower door. Shua. In a flash, all eyes turned toward him, making him the focal point on the field. Even the elder from Red Marshall Hall who was in charge of recording the results was now staring at Jian Wushuang in utter surprise. Am I qualified to enter the Sword Marquis token battle in 1 month? Jian Wushuang looked at the elder and asked. The elder was startled for a second. Then he returned to himself, nodded, and said, Jian Wushuang has completed the 7th level. Qualified. Jian Wushuang nodded with satisfaction. However, the people around him burst into a heated discussion. The 7th level. How could it be possible? How could Jian Wushuang get past the 7th floor? It generally requires a warrior whose cultivation reaches the 6th step of spirit path to complete it. However, Jian Wushuang, he could not condense any spiritual power just 1 month ago, could he? No. His cultivation could not be that strong. His swordsmanship must have been what helped him. Yes. That is right. I will never believe that a person without any spiritual power could reach the 6th step of spirit path in just 1 month. Many disciples were denigrating him. Jian Wushuang, a somber voice called out. Before he could react, a figure stood in front of Jian Wushuang. It was Jian Lin. He was so angry that his face was twisted. Chapter 15. Chapter 15, Fight. Jian Lin stared at Jian Wushuang coldly, while the latter looked at him indifferently. Jian Wushuang, it seems that I have always looked down upon you. I never expected that you had hidden yourself so deeply. Everyone thought you were trash who could not condense any spiritual power. But now it appears you could condense spiritual power long ago, and your cultivation is not bad. You have just hidden your power and were unwilling to expose it. Jian Lin's voice was as cold as a knife. About half a month ago, you exposed your cultivation at the 3rd step of spirit path in front of me. You faked that, didn't you? Pretend. Does he think I hid my strength for 4 years? Jian Wushuang sneered inwardly but did not give an answer. Jian Lin and the surrounding disciples could think what they liked. It didn't matter if they thought he had hidden his strength all this time or something similar. He did not mind at all. In the Sword Marquis mansion, what he really cared about was one person, Jian Meng'er. Jian Wushuang's indifference, even disregard, made Jian Lin even angrier. Jian Wushuang, I have passed the 7th level of the trial tower before. Now you have made it too, so do you dare to fight with me? Jian Lin said directly. Fight with you in public? Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and looked at him. What? You don't dare? The corner of Jian Lin's mouth turned up slightly, with a hint of disdain. Jian Lin, I am very curious. There are many disciples in the Sword Marquis mansion. Why do you always target me? If you envy me because of Jian Meng'er, well, now I am done with her. Why do you still bother me? Is your mind so narrow? Jian Wushuang asked with disdain. His guess was correct. Jian Lin was narrow-minded, and he was filled with jealousy. As Jian Wushuang had spent so much time with Jian Meng'er in the past, this caused Jian Lin's resentment toward him to reach its limit. Even though the relationship between them was now over, his resentment hadn't faded at all. Enough talk. I am just asking whether you dare to fight me. Jian Lin stared at Jian Wushuang firmly. Hearing these words, Jian Wushuang's mouth tilted slightly. He took a deep breath and raised his head again. His eyes flashed with a hint of relief. Well, I promise you, if you want to fight, then we will fight. There was a stir throughout the whole trial tower. Accepted the challenge. He accepted the challenge. How dare he accept it? Why wouldn't he? After all, he has passed the 7th level of the trial tower. Maybe his cultivation of spiritual power has reached the 6th step, too. Wait. They both passed the 7th level of the trial tower. Brother Jian Lin's cultivation reached the peak of the 6th step long ago. Obviously, Jian Wushuang has been hiding his cultivation level this whole time. Their fight will be very interesting. Disciples surrounding them, looking forward to the fight. You have got guts. Jian Lin grinned hideously, but he didn't look Jian Wushuang in the eye at all. Even if he had passed the 7th level of the trial tower, it would not make any difference. Everyone knew that any disciple whose cultivation had reached the 6th step could pass the 7th level easily. As for him, he had reached the peak of the 6th step long ago. Take this. Jian Lin roared loudly and stamped his foot. He was so powerful that a crack appeared in the floor and boundless spiritual power poured out like a flood. Using his spiritual power, his right hand was clenched into a fist. Immediately he threw a punch with vast power, raising a fierce wind around him. His cultivation at the peak of the 6th step of the spirit path burst out instantly. Many disciples present kept their eyes open. Although the fist was not aimed at them, they still could feel its tremendous force. Facing the full outburst of Jian Lin's power, Jian Wushuang kept his eyes cold and sharp. His spiritual power poured out slowly. The 6th step. It really is the 6th step. As soon as Jian Wushuang's spiritual power was revealed, many disciples around him knew his true cultivation immediately. Although they were both at the 6th step, there were some differences. Get out of my way. An angry roar sounded out like a thunderbolt. Jian Wushuang struck with all his power. "Haha, you dare fight me without drawing your sword. How stupid." Jian Lin could not help laughing. Everyone knew that Jian Lin was at the peak of the 6th step of the spirit path. Watching Jian Wushuang's reaction, it was obvious that he was uncertain if he could battle this level. Under the circumstances, he would be at an absolute disadvantage if he confronted Jian Lin directly. Bang! 2 spiritual power fists finally crashed together. The 2 fists containing hidden power exploded out at the same time. What? When Jian Lin's fist slammed into Jian Wushuang's, his face changed, because he felt the frightening power from Jian Wushuang's fist. This power was apparently stronger than his. How is this possible? He hasn't reached the peak of the 6th step. Jian Lin roared in his heart. With a heart filled with astonishment and anger, Jian Lin felt a burst of sharp pain. He groaned slightly, and blood spilt from his mouth. He retreated back 10 steps, and every step was so heavy and forceful that he left deep tracks on the floor. However, Jian Wushuang did not retreat even 1 step. Outclassed. Jian Wushuang totally surpassed Jian Lin in power. Many disciples were shocked. No one had thought the competition in pure force would turn out like this. One who obviously had not reached the peak of the 6th step should not have outclassed Jian Lin, who was at the peak of the same realm. However, they did not know that Jian Wushuang cultivated the heavenly creation skill. It defied the natural order, and the spiritual power warriors could release was much stronger than warriors following other forms of cultivations. Although Jian Wushuang had not reached the peak of the 6th heaven of divine path, the spiritual power he was capable of unleashing was stronger than other warriors at the peak of the 6th step of the spirit path. In this competition, totally focused on strength, Jian Wushuang completely outclassed Jian Lin. I cannot believe it. A flash of insanity appeared in Jian Lin's eyes. He was repelled by Jian Wushuang. He groaned and then rushed toward Jian Wushuang. He stretched out his right hand. A tiger's roar erupted suddenly between heaven and earth. Then, a giant tiger began to gradually form from the convergence of his power. After completely materializing, the giant tiger charged at Jian Wushuang like lightning. Its tiger-roaring fist. Brother Jian Lin is using a martial arts technique and he is using his most powerful one. That giant tiger was totally condensed by spiritual power. This movement costs vast spiritual power, but it is really strong. Look, Jian Wushuang is drawing his sword. The movement of the sword. Chuu. The cold sword light was shining, and then it vanished immediately. Time seemed to stop completely for a moment. In front of the shocked audience, the aggressive giant tiger was split into 2. Cho! The sound of a sword edge piercing into the body rang out. A smear of blood splashed across Jian Lin's shoulder. Chapter 16. Chapter 16. So what? Outside the trial tower, all was silent. No sound was heard except for the subtle sound of Jian Wushuang's long sword sliding back into its sheath. Ignoring the great shock in the eyes all around him, Jian Wushuang slowly turned away to leave. But before going, he stopped to glance at Jian Lin and said coldly, "This time I only chopped into your shoulder. But if there is a next time, I will chop off your head." Hearing this, Jian Lin was shocked and humiliated, feeling ashamed and resentful. And the disciples of Marquis Mansion did not recover from their surprise until Jian Wushuang had completely disappeared from their sight. Then, everyone present could not stop talking about what had happened. Brother Jian Lin was defeated. How could this happen? One move. Only one move. There is quite a big disparity in strength, not only in their spiritual powers, but the disparity between their martial arts techniques is even greater, and it was. Jian Wushuang surpassed Jian Lin in explosive spiritual power. And as for martial arts technique, it should be known that Jian Meng'e, whose attainments in swordsmanship were marvelous, was regarded as the first genius in the Sword Marquis Mansion. But her swordsmanship was taught to her by Jian Wushuang. Even Jian Meng'e herself knew that she was not qualified to compete with Jian Wushuang in martial arts technique. In the entire Sword Marquis Mansion, it seemed that there was no one better than Jian Wushuang in martial arts technique. Because of the great disparity in their martial arts techniques, Jian Wushuang had defeated Jian Lin with only one move and had hurt his shoulder. If Jian Wushuang had wanted to, he could have killed Jian Lin just now. The news that Jian Wushuang had passed the 7th level of the trial tower and defeated Jian Lin with one move swept over Sword Marquis Mansion like a hurricane. Suddenly, the Sword Marquis Mansion was in total shock. Naturally, the news also came to Jian Menge at once. Menge, something happened in the Marquis's mansion today. It was Jian Lan, the father of Jian Menge, who told her the news. Jian Wushuang had consolidated spiritual power and become a warrior. Moreover, his cultivation had reached the 6th step of the spirit path. Today, he passed the 7th level of the trial tower and defeated Jian Lin with only one move. Oh! Even Jian Menge felt quite astonished upon hearing that. Before our friendship broke up, he often said that he would be a real warrior soon. At that time, I thought he was just comforting himself. But now it seems that he wasn't. After being a little astonished, she slightly smiled and obviously did not take it seriously. Menge, I'm afraid that you should attach some importance to this, Jian Lan said seriously. Though many people in the Marquis's mansion thought that Jian Wushuang had been concealing his strength, you and I know that there was indeed no spiritual power in his body just 1 month ago. During the last 4 years, Jian Menge was together with Jian Wushuang all the time. No one knew him better than they did. In only 1 month, he went from an ordinary man without any spiritual power to a warrior of the 6th step of the spirit path and defeated Jian Lin so easily. What terrifying progress he has made, Jian Lan said. So he has. Jian Menge nodded in agreement, but, so what? Jian Lan was stunned for a second. Father, you're worrying that he will be a powerful opponent in the battle next month, aren't you? Jian Menge asked. Jian Lan nodded. Jian Wushuang had taken a blood oath that he would compete against Jian Menge in the battle. That news spread throughout Sword Marquis Mansion. At first, none of them took it seriously. But now, they changed their minds. If Jian Wushuang defeated Jian Menge in front of all the people of Sword Marquis Mansion and the other strong experts present, she would fail to be the Sword Pavilion Master. Furthermore, she and her father would be laughed at by everyone. Jian Menge, universally acknowledged as the top genius in Sword Marquis Mansion, was completely surpassed by someone within 2 months. Was that not a big joke? Father, you worry too much. Jian Menge did not care about it at all and said, it's normal that Jian Wushuang could eventually consolidate spiritual power and make normal progress after practicing for 4 years. Although he could go from an ordinary man to reaching the 6th step of the spirit path within 1 month, he won't be able to reach the 7th step of the spirit path by next month. What do you think, father? Reach the 7th step in 1 month? Jian Lan was stupefied for a moment and then shook his head firmly and resolutely. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. There is a great disparity between the 6th and 7th steps of the spirit path. Even a genius in cultivation like you spent a full half-year advancing from the 6th step to the 7th step of the spirit path. Moreover, you couldn't have succeeded without the assistance of lots of elixirs and some natural treasures, let alone an ordinary person. Therefore, no matter how fast Jian Wushuang cultivates, he can't reach the 7th step of the spirit path in 1 month. Jian Lan said resolutely and decisively. And indeed, that was true. A great disparity did exist between the 6th step of the spirit path and the 7th step of the spirit path. To make a breakthrough within 1 month was definitely wishful thinking. Yes, it's almost impossible. Besides, even if he did succeed, what could he do? Jian Menge said disdainfully. Hearing what Jian Menge had said, Jian Lan relaxed the frown on his face and then smiled. Indeed, regardless of whether or not Jian Wushuang could reach the 7th step of the spirit path in a month, he could do nothing even if he did make it. Presently, Jian Menge possessed cultivation at the profound spiritual sea realm. No matter how extraordinary Jian Wushuang was in swordsmanship, he could not compete with Jian Menge unless he was in the spiritual sea realm. Maybe I am overthinking this. Jian Wushuang can't threaten you. Jian Lan smiled in relief. Don't talk about him. Tell me about the master behind you. Is there any reply to the message? I have gotten a reply, Jian Menge answered with expectation, Great Master said that she would present herself at the battle in 1 month to witness me becoming the new Sword Pavilion Master. Haha, that's great. If she could present herself at the battle, you would no doubt be the winner. Hearing the good news, Lan felt very delighted. In the Sword Pavilion, the 4 great elders, headed by Elder Hong, were gathered. Haha. Young Pavilion Master passed the 7th level and defeated Lin with 1 move. That's awesome. It's amazing that the young Pavilion Master could have made such rapid progress in such a short period of time, isn't it? If the young Pavilion Master keeps improving at such a speed, he is likely to defeat Menge in the battle next month. Having heard the good news, these elders were all talking and laughing. Elder brother, we concealed that matter from the young Pavilion Master because he was previously not even a warrior. But now, should we tell him about it? Another elder suddenly asked. No hurry, Elder Hong shook his head and said, it's too early. We should tell him a bit later. By the way, I'm going to write a letter and send it to the Master in the Golden Dragon Palace. He will be glad to know that the young Pavilion Master has made such rapid progress. The whole Sword Marquis Mansion was shocked by the battle between Jian Wushuang and Lin. However, Jian Wushuang, the hero of the battle, did not care about it at all. After getting permission to join in the battle, he directly left for 9 Wolves Mountain. Jian Wushuang was very eager to get to the pond full of primordial spiritual liquid. Chapter 17. Chapter 17. The Ghastful Speed of Improvement. 9 Wolves Mountain was 15 kilometers away from the county and it took Jian Wushuang half a day to get there. He spent a long time trying to find the cave in the north rift of the mountain. It's that cave. Standing at the top of a big tree, Jian Wushuang could see a cave at the bottom of the rift. Not far from the cave was a huge monster. Its breathing sounded rhythmically from its nose. Is that a bloody lion? Jian Wushuang stared at the huge monster, unable to look away. Bai Chong had mentioned that the cave with primordial spiritual liquid was the territory of a bloody lion at the peak of the 6th realm. A monster at the peak of that realm could match a warrior at the peak of the 6th step of spirit path. Some spirit beasts had innate advantages, so when they battled human beings, they were stronger. The spirit beasts are born to hate human beings, and their territorial awareness is extremely strong. If I want to get into that cave, I have no choice but to kill the bloody lion. So let's fight. Jian Wushuang's eyes were like lightning. Like an eagle preying on its food, he leapt down from the treetop. Long sword on his back was unsheathed at the same time. The sound of his sword echoed in the rift, as Jian Wushuang rushed violently towards the bloody lion. Bloody lion. Jian Wushuang's eyes were full of battle intent. Human being. Bloody lion woke up with a start and a pair of dark gold eyes burst out with cold killing intent. With an angry roar, it charged ferociously at Jian Wushuang. The battle surprisingly finished in just an instant. Jian Wushuang sheathed his bloody long sword and looked at bloody lion on the ground. Blood oozed from the deep sword scar in its neck. Many sword scars of different sizes were spread all over its body. It was dead now. According to convention, at the peak of the 6th realm, the bloody lion was powerful enough to defeat human beings at peak of the 6th step of the spirit path. However, this was only the case with normal human warriors. Once it encountered human warriors who mastered excellent martial arts techniques, not only could it not defeat them, it would be totally defeated by them. Jian Wushuang's swordsmanship could overwhelm the whole Sword Marquis Mansion, so killing a bloody lion was rather easy. Ignoring the bloody lion's corpse, Jian Wushuang stepped into the cave. It was deep, and its path was very narrow. However, when he went through the small entranceway, he found it was quite different from the outside. The interior of the cave was quite refined. There was a stone table, bench, and bed. It appeared that someone had once lived here. As he entered further into the cave, he found that the pond emitted a faint scent. The diameter of the pond was 3 meters or less. It belonged to a small creature. However, as soon as Jian Wushuang noticed the pond, his eyes were full of wild excitement. Primordial spiritual liquid. Jian Wushuang looked at the fragrant, and nearly transparent, water in the pond eagerly. He could feel the pure power contained in the water. There was no doubt this pond water truly was the invaluable primordial spiritual liquid. The whole pond. Jian Wushuang jumped into the pond. The moment he entered the pond, he found that although it was not long in diameter, it was very deep, at least 10 meters. Such a large pond. All this water is primordial spiritual liquid. I wonder how much there is. Jian Wushuang thought in excitement. Primordial spiritual liquid was the purest spiritual liquid. It contained almost no impurities. For warriors following the spirit path, it was much stronger than spirit cultivating pills. Primordial spiritual liquid formed naturally, so very few people could use large quantities of it to improve their cultivation. But now there was a whole pond. If the water was divided into drops, how many would it be? What would the value be? No doubt it was very high. Sir Bai Chong has given me such an amazing opportunity. Trembling slightly with anticipation, Jian Wushuang was extremely grateful. Without hesitation, Jian Wushuang began to cultivate in the pond. By cultivating in the pond, he could absorb the primordial spiritual liquid surrounding him and turn it into spiritual power. For an ordinary warrior, it would take a considerable amount of time to absorb all the primordial spiritual liquid in the pond, but Jian Wushuang was different. Heavenly creation skill greatly defied the natural order. The first-class spirit cultivating pill he'd taken earlier contained such toxicity that it would take ordinary warriors 1 or 2 months to absorb it. However, Jian Wushuang had completely absorbed the pill in just 1 night. It was the same with the primordial spiritual liquid. As Jian Wushuang started to practice heavenly creation skill, the power of his cultivation method immediately manifested itself. An overbearing power was erupting out from his body, forcefully absorbing everything nearby. The primordial spiritual liquid in the pond was the first to be absorbed. It flooded into Jian Wushuang's pores at an amazing speed. It was like a huge black hole, consuming everything, crazy and overwhelming. How horrifying was the absorption speed. As primordial spiritual liquid flooded into his body, it was changed into spiritual power by using the heavenly creation skill. With this process of absorption and change, the steadily increasing speed of his spiritual power could be regarded as terrifying. It is too fast. The increase of my spiritual power is too fast and terrifying. Jian Wushuang was shocked at himself. His mind was muddled, and he could not believe it. Because the speed was too frightening. In fact, all this was natural. Primordial spiritual liquid combined with heavenly creation skill, which defied the heavens, was truly overwhelming and terrifying. Just like the first-class spirit cultivating pill he'd taken before, for warriors, primordial spiritual liquid's function was much stronger than spirit cultivating pills. The pond's primordial spiritual liquid was equal to 10 first-class spirit cultivating pills. Therefore, the increasing speed of his spiritual power was naturally beyond imagination. In just half a day, Jian Wushuang found his spiritual power had reached peak of the 6th heaven of divine path. It had only taken half a day. It seemed that the pond had not reduced much in primordial spiritual liquid from this half-day of absorption. Over the next few days, Jian Wushuang focused fully on cultivating and didn't tell anyone about the terrifying improvement of his strength. Time seemed to pass slowly, yet 20 days went by in the blink of an eye. In the pond, the water level was decreasing. Jian Wushuang remained in the pond, as some primordial spiritual liquid was still flowing into his body. Finally, as the last drop of primordial spiritual liquid was absorbed, the huge pond had disappeared completely. Jian Wushuang, who had been indulging in his cultivation, suddenly opened his eyes. A terrifying flash burst out from his eyes. Chapter 18. Chapter 18, The Breakthrough. From the bottom of the pond, Jian Wushuang stood up slowly. All his muscles and joints crackled as he rose. He stretched and took a great leap to the entrance of the cave. Jian Wushuang looked at the wall of the mountain ahead of him with his sparkling eyes. A sudden clenching of his right hand made an explosive force burst out instantly from the mountain. Bang! The tremendous sound echoed through the cave. Jian Wushuang looked at the large hole in the wall in front of him. His eyes were bright. Not only did I reach the 8th heaven of divine path, I reached the peak. Clenching his fists in excitement, He could feel the surging power contained in his hands. Jian Wushuang had spent 20 days cultivating in this cave, absorbing every drop of primordial spiritual liquid from the pond. It had contained a huge quantity of pure spiritual power, which he had absorbed completely and transformed into spiritual power. As a result, his strength had improved to an amazing state. Not long ago he had been at the 6th heaven of divine path, close to the peak. But today, a series of breakthroughs had brought him to the 7th heaven of divine path, then the 8th heaven of divine path. He had skyrocketed to the peak of the 8th heaven of divine path. It was an explosive breakthrough. But everything happened in a systematic manner. After all, not everyone had access to such a vast amount of primordial spiritual liquid to help with his cultivation, let alone heavenly creation skill, heaven-defying cultivation method. His marvelous breakthrough was attributed to the primordial spiritual liquid and the heavenly creation skill. The 8th heaven of divine path was equivalent to the initial spiritual sea realm for an ordinary warrior. One who reached the peak of the 8th heaven of divine path had the same power as one at the peak of the initial spiritual sea realm. So spiritual power operated with the strength advantage of heavenly creation skill could be equivalent to the profound spiritual sea realm. Perhaps it was slightly lower, but not by much. A stunning light burst out from Jian Wushuang's eyes. "Jian Menge, I am gaining on you," Jian Wushuang roared. Jian Menge had cultivated to the profound spiritual sea realm. Although he had not solidified his cultivation, he had his heaven-defying heavenly creation skill, spiritual power, and so on. It meant that compared with Jian Menge, he was almost as strong as her. He had only needed 2 months to catch up to her. 10 days. There are still 10 days before the battle. With his eyes squinting, Jian Wushuang thought, "I should take my time. I have gained battle strength similar to the profound spiritual sea realm and have a great chance of defeating Jian Menge in battle. However, I still need to prepare a certain trump card for myself, just in case." Thinking about a trump card, the first thing that came to his mind was the secret skill recorded in heavenly creation skill. Soul-devouring secret skill. It was an extremely powerful secret skill that defied the heavens. Along with heavenly creation skill, he was deeply impressed with this secret skill. It was impossible to forget. When Jian Wushuang thought about this secret skill, he was shocked. It was so powerful that he thought it harmed natural harmony. Furthermore, it inflicted damage on the person who exercised it. Nobody was willing to use it unless it was really an emergency. It did not make sense to use such a secret skill as the trump card. Soul-devouring secret skill contains 3 scrolls. In my present realm, I can only try the first one, at most. I can't even consider the second and third one right now. With a smile, Jian Wushuang started studying this skill. It took him a total of 5 days. 5 days later, Jian Wushuang was in the north rift of Nine Wolves Mountain, sitting cross-legged in a glade. "Let's do it." He took a deep breath and started practicing soul-devouring secret skill. He spent 5 days studying. He was able to grasp the first scroll of the skill, but it had taken a considerable amount of time to carry out. He knew well the harm the skill could cause him, so he was very careful when putting it to use. He didn't dare to be sloppy. The secret skill, it devours one's soul. As he cultivated the secret skill, there was a buzzing sound. It even shocked the void. Jian Wushuang's body seemed like a giant black hole, into which there were constant peculiar forces flooding in at an amazing speed. These forces were so complex and diverse that Jian Wushuang had difficulty identifying them. But he found that with the infusion of these forces, his cultivation was booming. He had already been at the 8th heaven of divine path before, but this wild infusion of forces pushed his cultivation to a higher level. A single moment was enough to make a breakthrough from the 8th heaven. The 9th heaven of the divine path. His power continued to rise even after he reached the 9th heaven of the divine path. Suddenly, there was a sharp surge of pain in his heart. It became more intense with the rise of his cultivation. "Stop it, now." Jian Wushuang was clenching his teeth. His face was distorted. Feeling the sharp pain, he stopped the operation promptly. As soon as the secret skill stopped, his increasing cultivation ceased. The pain began to weaken. Even so, The spasms in his body did not diminish right away. Lying on the glade, Jian Wushuang closed his eyes. He was gasping for breath and looked very weak. It was a long time before he opened his eyes. Soul-devouring secret skill. It really is a secret skill that devours the soul? Jian Wushuang couldn't help shaking his head. It really hurt. It was harmful to practice this skill. He had spared some effort, because he didn't push his cultivation to its full extent. However, he still felt extreme pain. If he had exercised it to the full degree, it would be more painful. The soul-devouring secret skill really causes a surge in my cultivation in a short time, but it hurts me even more, Jian Wushuang said to himself. It was one's essence, qi and spirit, rather than their spiritual power, that the soul-devouring secret skill harmed. If it only consumed large quantities of spiritual power, he would not care at all. Heavenly creation skill, after all, helped him to recover spiritual power quickly. As for the essence, qi and spirit, however, even heavenly creation skill could make no difference. Jian Wushuang shook his head and looked up. He wore a weird expression. It's. Jian Wushuang stared at everything around him in amazement. He realized the earth within dozens of meters around him had become lifeless. The earth, which had been dark green before, was now yellow and full of cracks. The flowers, grass, and trees were withering away. The ground with dozens of meters around him had died in the twinkling of an eye. Chapter 19. Chapter 19. The Gathering of All Parties. With his eyes wide open, Jian Wushuang stared at his surroundings in wonder, a dozen-meter radius where the earth was a lifeless land of death. Further away from the circle, the land was green and vibrant. It was at this exact moment that Jian Wushuang understood how the soul-devouring secret skill had been named. It devoured the soul. What was soul-devouring? The skill would take the soul of the earth, creatures, and nature. He understood what the strange and intricate power flowing into his body just now had been. It had been the natural power of the nearby creatures. The soul-devouring secret skill worked by taking the power of all living beings within reach and keeping them for his own use. This skill really is horrible. Unless it is absolutely necessary, I will never use it again. Jian Wushuang warned himself. After this first taste, Jian Wushuang dared not to try it again. Instead, he continued to study the detailed steps of carrying out the skill. 3 days later, Jian Wushuang was in the creek in the very middle of Nine Wolves Mountain. He cupped his hands to drink from the creek and then stood up. It is the end of the month, and I am only 2 days away from the battle. It is time to go back now. Jian Wushuang looked at the endless sky above him. He smiled and jumped up into the air, then headed in the direction of Sword Marquis Mansion. In the early morning, dawn was just breaking. In Sword Marquis Mansion, when the first blush of the rising sun from the far horizon began to light the earth, everyone fell into an uproar. The disciples and tribesmen of the mansion poured out from each building and gathered in the drill ground at the center of the Marquis's mansion. Each party and tribe of the whole Bashui commandery, as well as those from Sword Marquis Mansion, had dispatched their experts to Sword Marquis Mansion. Today, the annual Sword Marquis token battle was being held in the mansion. Actually, the so-called Sword Marquis token was only a title for the strongest person among the youth. An expert would grow up and eventually advance, so the Sword Marquis Mansion attached great importance to the cultivation of young disciples. Every year, Sword Marquis Mansion invited all the parties and tribes of the commandery to watch the battle. Under normal circumstances, an invitation from Sword Marquis Mansion, the top most recognized power in Bashui commandery, would not be refused by any party. This year was no exception. The Sword Marquis token battle was of special significance, especially this year. It was universally acknowledged in Bashui commandery that there was a rare super genius in Sword Marquis Mansion. This super genius was only 16 and had already reached the profound spiritual sea realm. What's more, her swordsmanship was unfathomable. Such a young girl was going to take charge of the sword pavilion, which enjoyed a significant position in the mansion. Her deeds made every prominent persons in Bashui commandery full of curiosity and expectation. And this exceptional genius was of course Jian Meng'er, the god's chosen daughter in the Sword Marquis mansion. It was the perfect time for Jen Menge to flex her muscle in front of all the experts and to shoot for fame. After today, the Sword Pavilion would officially be in Jen Menge's charge. She would be the one crowned in the mansion. A great number of people had already swarmed into the wide drill ground. There were 2 platforms. One was used as the ring for disciples to show their strength, while the other one was the stands for the audience. Jian Xinhong, the current Sword Marquis mansion master, was seated in a chair, having a casual conversation with several great personages who sat by him. Since these people could sit side by side with the mansion master, one could infer that their background was not normal. Look. That must be Sichu Qingyu, the master of tribe Sichu. That's Yi Xiu, the master of tribe Yi. Their family also focuses on swordsmanship. However, compared with our Sword Marquis mansion, they are far worse. It is unexpected that this Sir Bai Chong, the mysterious supervisor of the gladiator arena, would come. A lot of disciples of the mansion were carefully discussing many things around the drill ground. They fixed their eyes on the stands from time to time to have a good look at these famous experts whom they seldom saw. The Sichu and Yi tribes enjoyed a little less power and position than Sword Marquis mansion, but the gap was narrow. As for the gladiator arena, it boasted great strength. In addition, the arena held an aloof position and didn't participate in the conflicts. Even the mansion master, Jian Xinhong, was wary of Bai Chong. Mr. Bai Chong, it is really a surprise that you have come to the Sword Marquis token battle personally this year. In recent years, you often sent a gold-robed servant from the gladiator arena on your behalf, said Sichu Qingyu, while wearing a smile. It is a great honor for me and the mansion, that Mr. Bai Chong has chosen to participate in this battle in person, said Jian Xinhong. This battle is much different from those before. It is normal that I should come in person. I am also curious about this exceptional genius and want to see exactly how talented she is, Bai Chong replied with a smile. Trust me, she won't let you down, Jian Xinhong said and laughed, showing his confidence in Jen Menge. Really? Bai Chong lifted his eyebrows. He laughed uncannily but didn't say anything more. Looking around the drill ground, he immediately noticed Jen Wushuang in a corner. He was leaning against the wall with his eyes closed. Bai Chong could not help smiling. The little boy is so calm. I wonder whether his strength has improved since the journey through Nine Wolves Mountain. Bai Chong was quite concerned for Jen Wushuang because of his friendship with Jen Nantian. He had provided Jen Wushuang with the opportunity to gain a whole pond of primordial spiritual liquid. His consideration for Jen Wushuang could be seen from what he had done. He had come mostly because of Jen Wushuang. It's almost time. Let's start, Jian Xinhong said on the platform. Jian Lan, who stood close to Jian Xinhong, nodded his head gently. Then he took a few steps and came to the very center of the platform. He cleared his throat and said, "Attention. Would all of the disciples participating in this battle please come up?" As the great elder of the Redley Martial Hall, Jian Lan was supposed to host the Sword Marquis token battle this time. There was a disturbance in the drill ground. The young disciples who had acquired their position in the battle by getting through the 5th level of the trial tower went to the center of the ground. They hustled and bustled. There were a good dozen young disciples at first sight, all of whom were geniuses in the Sword Marquis mansion, including Jen Wushuang. At the same time, a beautiful white figure was walking slowly towards them. Suddenly, everyone on the drill ground gave their full attention to her. Not only the disciples on the ground, even the personages on the platform turned their gaze to this white figure. As the god's chosen daughter in Sword Marquis mansion, disciples in the mansion adored Jen Menge as if she was a goddess. She was so beautiful, along with her cultivation and even her gift in sword principle. She had one great admiration. Chapter 20. Chapter 20, Tianyuan Sword Sect. Jen Menge stepped forward, looking like an untouchable goddess, meant to be worshipped by the masses with her beautiful and aloof appearance. Her every move attracted the attention of those around her. Jen Menge, 16, profound spiritual sea realm. She had already mastered the 18 first-class sword arts of the Sword Pavilion. Based on her current speed, She'll likely reach the Gold Core realm before she turns 20. A 20-year-old Gold Core realm expert. My God. Many disciples of Sword Marquis Mansion near the drill ground couldn't help sighing with emotion when they saw this extraordinary beauty. The realms were ranked as such: the 7 steps of the spirit path, transforming C from spiritual power, and finally, primordial gold core. The primordial gold core realm was the strongest, and there was only one gold core realm expert in Sword Marquis Mansion. He was the mansion master, Jian Xinhong. And what did a person who became an expert of the golden core realm before the age of 20 represent? Blinding strength. She's such an exceptional genius that we can't even muster the slightest motivation to compete with her. She's a peerless genius that can only be seen once in a lifetime in Sword Marquis Mansion. No wonder she has hopes of becoming the new Sword Pavilion Master at such a young age. No one can hold a candle to such an exceptional genius in the entire Bashui Commandery, never mind the Sword Marquis Mansion. Even those famous experts on the grandstand were staring at Jian Meng'er with gleaming eyes. Nearly all were here for her, except for Bai Chong and a few others. The eye-catching and aloof girl made a beeline for Jian Wushuang, who stood amid the crowd. She spoke without emotion. Jian Wushuang, I heard you finally condensed your spiritual power and became a warrior. Congratulations. Turning his head, Jian Wushuang gave her a cold glance and said nothing. She wasn't angry. You've become a warrior and even achieve a breakthrough into the 6th step of the spirit path in such a short time. That's admittedly terrific. But you can't hope to close the gap in our strength in just 2 months. I advise you not to challenge me today. Don't challenge you? He sneered. This battle is unavoidable ever since you and your father started coveting the position of Sword Pavilion Master 2 months ago. Stubborn. But you've always been this way. She was still indifferent. I know you bear resentment in your heart, but there's an unbridgeable gap between us. Why must you come and seek humiliation? Seek humiliation? You really do think very highly of yourself. Have it your way. You can't blame me later when you're the one not accepting my advice. I'll show you the full extent of my strength and snip that impossibly stupid idea you have in the bud, she said coolly. I'll be looking forward to it. Jian Meng'er ended the conversation and stood casually in the center of the drill ground. Though she was surrounded by many young geniuses of the Sword Marquis Mansion, they might as well be invisible compared to her. She was like a crane standing among chickens, attracting attention with every move she made. For example, everyone had noticed the brief conversation between her and Jian Wushuang. Jian Meng'er is talking to Jian Wushuang. What is she saying? Earlier, they spoke in very quiet voices. Coupled with the noise in the drill ground, no one except the talented disciples close to them heard their conversation. They became very curious about it. I heard that Jian Wushuang made a blood oath 2 months ago to battle it out with Jian Meng'er today. I heard that too. This guy is really overreaching himself. How dare he challenge Jian Meng'er? Who among us young disciples of Sword Marquis Mansion has the right to challenge this god's chosen daughter? Jian Wushuang is just trash who condensed his spiritual power 2 months ago. How dare he? That's not exactly true. He may have condensed his spiritual power very late, but he spent only a month to break through the 6th step of the spirit path. His cultivating speed is unbelievable. So what? He's merely at the 6th step of the spirit path. A month has passed since then. Are you suggesting he has broken through the 7th step of the spirit path or the spiritual sea realm and is on par with Jian Meng'er? What a joke. That's true. All of them began looking down on him. On the drill ground, there was another person who was paying special attention to Jian Wushuang. It was Jian Lin. 1 month ago, Jian Wushuang defeated him, and badly at that. He had been harboring deep resentment since then, and today was his chance to avenge himself. He held his hands firmly together, repeating Jian Wushuang's name in his mind. The young disciples who had passed the 5th story of the trial tower gathered in the middle of the drill ground. Just as Jian Lan was getting ready to announce the start of the battle, 2 people showed up nearby. What? The famous experts on the grandstand noticed the newcomers immediately and instantly looked at them with sharp eyes. Even the languid Bai Chong couldn't help glancing at them. Primordial gold core. Not only that, the peak of the gold core realm, the famous experts were all awed. Those with primordial gold cores were definitely top-notch experts in the Bashui commandery. Everyone with the right to sit in the grandstand had all achieved that level, but most had only reached the initial gold core realm, with Jen Shinhong being stronger than most. But, although he had reached the profound gold core realm, he still had a long way to go before he would achieve the peak of the gold core realm. Among those present, there was only one who had the possibility of reaching the peak of the gold core realm. That was Bai Chong, and that was merely a possibility, not a certainty. He hardly ever fought with others, so no one knew about his true condition. Now, the leader of the two newcomers was evidently a peak gold core realm expert. It's her. Bai Chong was stunned, recognizing the newcomer. Sir Bai Chong, you know her? Jian Shinhong promptly asked. Yes. Bai Chong nodded. It's Shui Hanshin, the 9th elder of the Tianyuan sword sect. She reached the peak of the gold core realm 10 years ago. Tianyuan sword sect. And an elder at that. Everyone on the grandstand was shocked. They were all famous experts in the Bashui commandery, with vast knowledge. They naturally knew about the Tianyuan sword sect. The Tianyuan sword sect was one of the 5 sects in the Tianyang province. It was said that there were quite a few experts in that sect who had reached the Yin-Yang void realm, and there were even more experts in the gold core realm. In the entire Tianyang province, the sect was doubtlessly a strong influence and a true top sect. These experts in the Bashui commandery, even the most powerful, Sword Marquis Mansion, were nothing compared to the Tianyuan sword sect. After all, their commandery was only one out of the 108 commanderies in the Tianyang province. An elder of the sect, no matter their identity or strength, was enough to incite awe in these famous experts. They began wondering why an elder of the Tianyuan sword sect would come to Sword Marquis Mansion. Just then, Jen Lan, who was also on the grandstand, said proudly, "Don't worry, everyone. Elder Shui is here especially for my daughter." The famous experts looked stunned. In the middle of the drill ground, Jen Menger, who had been drawing attention all along, was already walking toward the newcomers. Chapter 21. Chapter 21. The Chosen One. Great Master. The way Jen Menger respectfully addressed the woman fully illustrated the nature of their relationship. Shui Hanshin nodded, turning her gaze to the grandstand. I didn't expect you'd also be here, Mr. Bai Chong. Elder Shui, it's been so long since we last met. Have you been well? Bai Chong's reply appeared to be rather stiff. Haha, the arrival of Elder Shui of the Tianyuan sword sect brings light to our humble Sword Marquis Mansion. Jian Shinhong stood up with a face full of smiles. The other famous experts on the grandstand followed his cue and made their greetings. They had to be humble in the face of the eminent status of an elder of Tianyuan sword sect. Bai Chong's eyes flickered as he stared at Shui Hanshin. He was the only one who did not get up to greet her. You're all too courteous, she said, smiling faintly. Then Shui Hanshin climbed onto the arena. A servant from Sword Marquis Mansion prepared a seat for her immediately. The grim-looking young man following Shui Hanshin chose to stand quietly by her side. Elder Shui, is that girl your disciple? Bai Chong casually asked. You're right. Shui Hanshin nodded. I accepted her as a personal disciple 2 years ago. This time, I'm actually here to bring her back to cultivate in the Tianyuan sword sect. Personal disciple? Cultivate in Tianyuan sword sect? Everyone on the grandstand all sucked in a breath. It was the one and only Tianyuan sword sect. For Jen Menger to enter such a sect and be accepted as a personal disciple by an elder, it only meant she was destined for a great future. Not to mention, it spoke volumes about her incredible talent. This raised an uproar on the drill ground. Tianyuan sword sect. Jian Menger was accepted as a personal disciple by an elder of the Tianyuan sword sect. To begin with, she's already so strong. Now that she'll be cultivating in the Tianyuan sword sect, her future is a promising one. Looks like our Sword Marquis Mansion will be welcoming another expert very soon. She might even be stronger than the mansion master. Numerous eyes were fixed on Jen Menger. She, who was already eye-catching in the first place, became even more dazzling under the attention. Before, her innate talent was already enough to make others despair. She was now even more perfect as the personal disciple of an elder of the Tianyuan sword sect. No one would dare to question any of her future achievements. She was truly God's chosen daughter. Tianyuan sword sect. Jian Wushuang squinted but did not say anything else. On the grandstand, Jian Lan was in high spirits and said, "Let's start our battle today." The annual Sword Marquis token battle had begun. This battle was divided into 2 rounds. First was martial arts technique, followed by cultivation of spiritual power. Of course, this battle was not meant to be a duel. It was enough as long as everyone demonstrated their strongest martial arts technique and cultivation of spiritual power. Come forward one by one according to the number you received in the lottery. Jian Lan shouted. First, Jian Lin. Everyone on the drill ground immediately focused their attention on Jian Lin. Jian Lin's the first one, while I'm the last one. Jian Wushuang looked at the number 38 on his ticket from the lottery. There were exactly 38 youngsters taking part in this battle, so he was the last one. Under everyone's eyes, Jian Lin took a deep breath and slowly walked forward to the arena. "Show us your strongest martial arts technique, or what you're most skilled in," Jian Lan said. "I understand." Jian Lin nodded and started to demonstrate his martial arts technique. Roar. A giant tiger, entirely conjured from spiritual power, materialized in front of him, roaring loudly. Tiger roaring fist. It was Jian Lin's strongest, as well as most skilled, technique. Swift and violent, this move was also full of power and might. Amazing. What an overbearing punch. Exclamations soon resounded around the drill ground. Not bad. You can leave now, Jian Lan ordered, glancing at Jian Lin who had slowly returned to a neutral posture. Jian Lin nodded and slowly walked down from the arena under the eyes of everyone. He glanced at Jian Wushuang at the same time, feeling nervous after seeing his poker face. He was pretty happy with his performance today. But he had used his tiger roaring fist and still lost to Jian Wushuang a month ago. That experience had inevitably left him with some trauma. Next, Jian Qiu. The disciples all went up to the arena to demonstrate their best martial arts techniques, one by one. Many of them chose to show off their swordsmanship. They were pretty good to have such levels in the spirit path, but it was difficult for them to leave an impression on the famous experts in the audience. Next, Jian Menge. When Jian Lan read his daughter's name, he deliberately made his voice sound impassioned. Excitement immediately swept everyone on the drill ground, including the famous experts on the grandstand. They all fixed their gazes on her. They had high expectations for this chosen daughter. Dressed in white, Jian Menge walked up to the arena. She first bowed to those on the grandstand before beginning her swordsmanship demonstration. Whoosh! The unsheathing of her sword edge caused a piercing sword echo to resound through the drill ground. The sword echo carried a faint trace of killing intent, coming from the first-class killing sword, the triple kill sword, from the Marquis's mansion. Swish! The waving sword light was so gentle that it gave the onlookers the feeling of drifting in the ocean. It's the wave superposition sword art. The moment Jian Menge demonstrated this sword art, everyone immediately recognized what it was. Interesting. Out of the 18 first-class 18 sword arts of Sword Pavilion, she chose this one. Looks like she's very confident, Bai Chong said, smiling. You seem to understand this sword art very well, Shui Hinkson casually noted. Just barely, Bai Chong replied. It's only a first-class sword art, but if you can utilize it to the end, its power can surpass that of first-class sword arts. Oh! The rest of the people on the grandstand became interested. Jian Xinhong, you're the Sword Marquis Mansion Master. You should be the one most familiar with this sword art. Why don't you explain it? Bai Chong threw the responsibility of answering to Jian Xinhong. Haha. Mr. Bai Chong, you're right. Jian Xinhong immediately gave his explanation. Though this kind of sword art is just one of the 18 first-class sword arts of Sword Pavilion, it's quite a special one. If you show the sword art in its entirety, its power is no less than those legendary superclass sword arts. It's called the wave superposition sword art because the user can accumulate the power of the sword art as they continue to use it. There's actually only one true movement to this sword art, and that's the splitting technique. It's very simple, just splitting. But the splitting process will pile up. The power superimposes on one another and ends up becoming greater. This way, the sword art naturally becomes more powerful and finally surpasses the level of first-class sword arts. Chapter 22. Chapter 22, Wave Superposition Sword Art. The power of the sword art will stack. Several famous experts on the stand could not help being moved. Sichu Qingyu continued, this kind of sword art requires a strict application of power. Indeed. Jian Xinhong nodded. The wave superposition sword's art needs to constantly store power, so it can be even stronger. Under normal circumstances, if the power can be overlapped 7 times, that is, if the user can demonstrate 7 moves, the sword art will have reached the profound level. This sword art requires 7 moves to reach the profound level. Let's see how many moves this exceptional genius from Sword Marquis Mansion can perform. Sichu Qingyu smiled. Everyone was looking forward to her performance. On the arena, Jian Menge's swordsmanship was incredibly smooth, stacking wave after wave. She made her first sword move without an ounce of hesitation. The second, third, and fourth moves were also instantaneous. The 5th, 6th, and 7th quickly followed. The process was smooth without any pause. The spectators could clearly see the power of Jian Menge's sword art become stronger and stronger. That was the result of the power superposing on one another. However, when it came to her 7th sword move, there was no uproar in the drill ground. To use 7 moves, achieving the profound level in the wave superposition sword art, was nothing impressive. However, after the 7th sword move, she adjusted her wrist. Ha! With a cry, she demonstrated the 8th sword move. The sword art had been superposed 8 times and its power had exceeded the limits of first-class sword arts. It's the 8th sword move. Exclamations resounded throughout the drill ground. 7 moves would lead to the profound level of the wave superposition sword's art, while the 8th move meant the sword art reached the exceptional level. She's still not done yet, Jian Xinhong said excitedly on the grandstand. Sure enough, Jian Menge did not stop after making her 8th sword move. She was still accumulating power. Is she going to try for the 9th sword move? Under everyone's anticipation, the lovely girl in white wore a solemn expression. She moved her wrist, allowing power to accumulate to an ultimate level. An unexpected dazzling light flashed in her beautiful eyes. Whoosh! She dealt an aggressive split, directly cutting into the air. The 9th move of the wave superposition sword art was a success. Jian Menge finally felt at ease after completing this. She sheathed her sword and stood in place. A commotion broke out on the drill ground. The 9th sword move. She actually did it. Jian Xinhong stared at Jian Menge intensely and said, in the first place, the wave superposition sword art is the highest technique among the 18 first-class sword arts of Sword Pavilion. 7 moves are enough for the profound level, what more the 9th move? This girl is still so young but she's capable of demonstrating the sword art to this level. It's truly rare. Sichu Qingyu, Yi Xiu, and a few people agreed with this comment. After they learned the mystery of the wave superposition sword art, they immediately understood the difficulties of accumulating the power by 9-fold. Yet Jian Menge, a mere 16-year-old young girl, had accomplished this feat. Shui Hanshin, looks like you've taken in a talented disciple. The girl's talent for cultivation is already incredible, but it looks like her gift in sword principle isn't below any of the peerless talents in your sect, said Bai Chong, glancing at Shui Hanshin. Since she's my disciple, she'll naturally be extraordinary, Shui Hanshin replied calmly. On the grandstand, Jian Lan looked increasingly smug as he listened in on the conversations between the famous experts. Menge, you may leave, he ordered. Yes. Jian Menge bowed lightly towards the grandstand and left the arena under everyone's attention. On her way down, her glance inevitably went to Jian Wushuang who was standing at the edge of the drill ground. Jian Wushuang, you demonstrated the 9th sword move when you taught me the wave superposition sword art. I can do it as well as you now. Jian Menger's glance carried a hint of pride. Unlike the other Marquis Mansion disciples, Jian Wushuang's expression was still without any change when he saw her perform the ninth sword move. It seemed that, in his eyes, her ninth move was just SOSO. Next, Jian Ying. The battle continued, but Jian Menger's performance was simply too brilliant. She had completely overshadowed the rest. The last one, Jian Wushuang. It was finally Jian Wushuang's turn. When they heard his name, many disciples on the drill ground immediately wore odd expressions. Jian Wushuang was the infamous trash of Sword Marquis Mansion. But he had formed his spiritual power 2 months ago and gained victory against Jian Lin, giving others a new impression of him. However, when they heard that he challenged Jian Menger 2 months ago to a duel today, everyone thought he was an overreaching idiot. Now, it was this idiot's turn. Ignoring the attention, Jian Wushuang slowly stepped on the arena. Jian Wushuang. The way Jian Lan glanced at him was clearly different than how he looked at other disciples. "Show us your strongest martial arts or what you're most skilled in," Jian Lan said, his voice somewhat colder. Jian Wushuang prepared his sword, but his gaze was focused on the grandstand right ahead. On the grandstand, those famous experts took little notice of him and were still chattering on about Jian Menger. Only the leisurely Bai Chong smiled at him. Jian Wushuang nodded at him and unsheathed his long sword. Whoosh! The sword light was like the tide, surging forward with great momentum. It made everyone feel as if they had been submerged in the sea, yet carried a deeper meaning at the same time. Ah! Once Jian Wushuang demonstrated his swordsmanship, everyone on the drill ground was surprised. Even the famous experts in the grandstand were amazed. Wave superposition sword art? This little boy is also performing the wave superposition sword art? Sichu Qingyu laughed happily. It's the same sword art as Jian Menger. But since hers was too dazzling earlier, this boy wouldn't impress us even if he does as well as her. It doesn't matter even if he performs the 7th or 8th move, Yi Xiu said, laughing. That may not be true, Bai Chong suddenly spoke up. What do you mean? Sichu Qingyu and Yi Xiu asked. If Jian Menger can demonstrate the 9th sword move, reaching great heights in the wave superposition sword art, do you think the genius who imparted the sword art to her will be worse off? Bai Chong replied. What? Everyone in the stands was shocked. Mr. Bai Chong, are you saying that little boy taught Jian Menger the wave superposition sword art? Can he also perform the 9th sword move? Sichu Qingyu asked, having connected the dots. I don't know how good he is. Let's just watch and see, Bai Chong replied perfunctorily, not saying much. The curiosity of these famous experts in the stands had been piqued, so they immediately concentrated their attention on Jian Wushuang. Chapter 23. Chapter 23, Supreme Level? Transcend it. When everyone saw that Jian Wushuang was also performing the wave superposition sword art, an uproar was raised on the drill ground. He dared to perform the wave superposition sword art? He's digging his own grave. It was not such a big deal if 2 contestants demonstrated the same sword art here. But one of them was a dazzling and peerless genius and the other was the one who challenged that talent 2 months ago. It felt like a subtle provocation for Jian Wushuang to perform the same sword art. Jian Menger had already pushed this sword art to its greatest height. Isn't Jian Wushuang asking for trouble by performing it? That's not for sure. Don't forget it was Jian Wushuang who taught Jian Menger this sword art. So what? Jian Menger demonstrated the 9th sword move. Even if Jian Wushuang can do the same, what can he prove? What's the point to his provocation? All eyes were on Jian Wushuang who was standing on the arena. Many were wearing sneers on their faces. A small part of the disciples in Sword Pavilion wanted to argue for him, but those arguments seemed so weak in front of the Jian Menger who had performed the 9th move of this sword art. Jian Wushuang ignored everyone else. He had long focused all his attention on performing this sword art. Wave superposition sword art was a constant accumulation of power, stacked one over the other, requiring mastery of the most basic sword techniques. The sword light emerged like a tide. There was no hesitation in Jian Wushuang's movements as he performed the first 7 sword moves under everyone's eyes. The sound of the sword slicing the air reverberated with each move. His moves were still smooth after the 7th one and much more coordinated compared to Jen Mengus. The 8th sword move followed the 7th. It's the 8th sword move. People on the drill ground looked at him with earnest attention. But Jen Wuxuang did not stop after the 8th sword move, and everyone realized he was attempting the 9th sword move. But the 9th move was the peak level of this sword art. Would he be able to do it? Just as the curiosity of the spectators was roused, he was already ready to make his move in the next moment. In an instant, he made another sword move. The 9th sword move. He still demonstrated it naturally and smoothly. Exclamations rang all over the drill ground. Haha. As expected, Bai Chong was right on the mark. This little boy actually managed to perform the 9th sword move, and he did it even more smoothly than Jen Menga. His talent for sword principle is no less than hers, Sichu Qingyu said, smiling. The other famous experts in the grandstand nodded to show their agreements. Don't make your assumptions too soon. It's still too early to decide, said Bai Chong, wearing a mysterious smile. Everyone was stunned and instantly turned towards the arena. Instead of sheathing his blade, Jen Wuxuang, who had completed the 9th sword move, continued to wield his sword. What? The drill ground fell into silence just then. He had already completed the 9th sword move and had theoretically reached the limit. Yet he did not sheath his blade. What did he want to do? Don't tell me, he's attempting the 10th move? With someone speaking, the whole drill ground burst into exclamations in an instant. The 10th sword move. He's going to perform the 10th sword move. Is there be a 10th move in the wave superposition sword art? Everyone was stunned. That included Jen Menga, whose beautiful eyes were staring at Jen Wuxuang in disbelief. Jen Wuxuang was indeed continuing this sword art, power superposed on one another. When it finally reached a certain degree, his face turned steely and he stepped forward to make another sword move without any hesitation. The 10th move. Swish. His sword edge cut through the air, making an ear-splitting explosion. The power of the 10th sword move was evidently far stronger than the 9th sword move. A furor swept the drill ground. Bravo! Sichu Qingyu suddenly stood up, his eyes flashing with excitement. Jian Xinhong, your sword Marquis Mansion really has so many talent. We don't even have to talk about Jen Menga. She's an amazing genius. And you have this boy who has superposed the power 10 times and performed the 10th sword. His talent in sword principle is pretty terrifying. Yi Xiu looked at Jian Xinhong, his words carrying a deeper meaning. This, Jian Xinhong was pretty shocked himself. He did not know how he should respond. Jian Xinhong, didn't you just say the highest level of this sword art was the 9th move? What about the 10th move? Sichu Qingyu asked. Jian Xinhong took a deep breath and said solemnly, indeed, the highest level of the wave superposition sword art is the 9th move. The 10th move is at the supreme level. However, it's too hard to perform it. Since the time Sword Marquis Mansion obtained this sword art, there has only been one person who could perform the 10th move. That was Jian Nantian, the previous sword pavilion master. And this boy is his son. Jian Nantian's son? Sichu Qingyu was frozen in shock. Instantly, the famous experts in the grandstand began to look at Jen Wuxuang differently. The 10th move. I just knew the boy wouldn't disappoint me. A smile came over Bai Chong's face but disappeared just as quickly. What? Bai Chong blurted out in surprise. This, everyone in the grandstand was astonished. Jen Wuxuang, whose performance of the 10th move had left everyone astounded, was not done yet. His sword light began to flutter, ready to accumulate power. He was going to attempt the 11th move. That's impossible. Even Jian Xinhong could not help standing up, eyes gleaming with horror. This boy is mad. He's mad. Under the arena, Jian Lan was shouting again and again. The 11th move. Bai Chong and the rest in grandstand stood up with surprise. Even the high and lofty Shui Hanshin was stunned and, for the first time, looking at him approvingly. The drill ground sank into a deadly silence. Everyone's eyes were concentrated on Jian Wuxuang. He did not pay mind to their attention and closed his eyes, recalling everything his father told him when he taught him this sword art. Shuang, remember that there's no such thing as the supreme level to any sword art. If the 10th move is the supreme level of the wave superposition sword art, all you need to do is to transcend the supreme level. Swish. The ruthless sword light emerged with fury. This sword move seemed capable of splitting the world into two. On the arena, Jian Wushuang opened his eyes. A faint smile appeared on his face. I have transcended the supreme level. Father, I've done it. Chapter 24. Chapter 24. Spiritual power forms the foundation. What a shock! Everyone was shocked at the unprecedented movement. The 11th move. He really achieved it. How is that possible? If they had found Zhen Meng'er performing the 9th move of the wave superposition sword art amazing, then they could only describe Jian Wushuang's performance of the 11th move as being unbelievable. It was incredible. He was, without any doubt, incredible. He really pulled off the 11th move. In the grandstand, the esteemed elder Shui Hanshin of Chenyuan's sword sect looked stunned. After all, there was not a single person his age capable of doing that, even in her sect. That meant his talent for sword principle was unrivaled by even those in her sect. This young man, the sword Marquis Mansion Master, Zhen Xinhong, rose and stared intensely at Jian Wushuang. I'm the Mansion Master, but I didn't know his gift in sword principle had become this great. Sichu Qingyu and the others beside him were beyond shocked. Humph. The organizer of the battle, Zhen Lan, snorted and turned around to face the famous experts. Perhaps you all don't know this. Though Jian Wushuang's talent in sword principle is heaven-defying, his trash that can't even gather spiritual power. Without a corresponding cultivation of spiritual power, what use is his excellent swordsmanship? Oh, you mean the boy can't gather spiritual power? Asked Sichu Qingyu and several people, their expressions turning odd. That's right. In Sword Marquis Mansion, everyone knows Jian Wushuang is trash who has been unable to gather spiritual power since he was 12. Even though he succeeded and became a warrior at last, Jian Wushuang lost the golden 4 years for a warrior to lay a solid foundation. So, learning about this, what accomplishments do you think he can achieve in the future? Sneered Zhen Lan. Is this true? He just formed his spiritual power 2 months ago. What a pity. Sichu Qingyu and several excellent famous experts shook their heads and sighed. In the way of martial arts, the years from 12 to 16 were the most crucial stage, being the years of puberty. It was the best time to lay a solid foundation for cultivation. Once a person missed this golden stage, his achievements in the future would be limited. Of course, this was only applicable to ordinary practitioners, not for defiant cultivators who have cultivated a deviant cultivation like heavenly creation skill. Spiritual power is the foundation of the way of martial arts, while martial arts technique and swordsmanship are external factors. Even if he has excellent swordsmanship, he can't achieve much with weak cultivation of spiritual power. What a pity for this boy. Shui Hanshin glanced Jian Wushuang and shook her head. Even with ordinary cultivation, he has the right to be one of our disciples like Zhen Meng'er with his gift in sword principle. Yet the fact is, he has missed the best time for his cultivation. He has basically no chance of breaking through the spiritual sea realm. He doesn't have the qualification to be an expert. Several famous experts beside her nodded. Though Shui Hanshin's explanation was half-hearted and sloppy, she was right. They could only shake their heads and sigh, feeling sorry for a wasted talent in sword principle. On the drill ground, many disciples of Sword Marquis Mansion had also recovered from the shock and were sighing before long. Jian Wushuang's unparalleled gift in sword principle had given everyone present a shock. But what could it prove? In the world where everyone bowed down to warriors, cultivation of spiritual power was the foundation. The 11th move. Zhen Meng'er fixed a cold glare at the lonely figure descending down the arena. She had long known about Jian Wushuang's gift in sword principle. After her use of the 9th move of the wave superposition sword art, she thought she had finally surpassed him, even if it was just by a hair, but the gap between them was still huge. Either way, the cultivation of spiritual power formed the foundation of the way of martial arts. She vowed to crush his confidence in the second round of the battle. On the grandstand, Jianlan commented, "Cultivation of spiritual power is the foundation to cultivating martial arts. Our disciples shouldn't neglect the cultivation of spiritual power for martial arts technique. That's simply a fool's way." Jianlan's words resounded throughout the drill ground. It was obviously meant for Jian Wushuang. "We'll start the second round of the battle next. This round tests your cultivation of spiritual power. Please place the spiritual power gem here." Someone lifted a huge transparent gem, placing it on the arena. The middle of the gem was divided into 10 layers of microgrooves. The spiritual power gem was used to test cultivation of spiritual power, with 10 layers representing the 10 levels from the first step of the spirit path, up to the exceptional spiritual sea realm. First, Jian Lin. Jian Lin remained the first participant. "Do your best to instill your spiritual power in the spiritual power gem," Jian Lan said. "Yes." Jian Lin nodded, took a deep breath, and put out his palms, displaying his ability. Soon, a cluster of spiritual power flowed into the spiritual power gem. With the infusion of spiritual power, a bright light surged from the spiritual power gem. A dazzling violet light surged from the bottom to the top of the 10 layers of the gem, putting his cultivation of spiritual power at the peak of the 6th step of the spirit path. It did not end there. A fleck of violet light lit the 7th layer. The light was still dim, but the layer was still lit. The 7th layer was lit up. The 7th step of the spirit path. Jian Lin finally broke through the 6th step of the spirit path after so long. People on the drill ground praised him, and many of them looked at Jian Lin with envy. When he withdrew his palms, Jian Lin noticed the attention on him. His mood turned better. He had been mortified ever since he was defeated by Jian Wushuang a month ago, but he had now finally recovered some of his dignity. So what if Jian Wushuang has an excellent gift in sword principle? He's probably still in the 6th step now. Jian Lin sneered at Jian Wushuang and stared at him provocatively. But when he saw Jian Wushuang, his anger flared up. "This bastard dares ignore me," Jian Lin raged. He saw how Jian Wushuang had his eyes closed as he leaned against the wall the whole time. His attitude naturally irritated Jian Lin. What he did not know was that Jian Wushuang had never concerned himself with him since the very beginning. Jian Wushuang had never cared about him, not back then and certainly not now. Chapter 25. Chapter 25. Detection of spiritual power. Next, Zhen Meng'er. When the lovely girl in a snow-white dress went up the platform once again, the entire drill ground was awed into silence by her beauty. She was still so cold and arrogant. Though Jian Wushuang's performance had suppressed hers, it was not enough to overshadow her brilliance. What truly impressed everyone was her heaven-defying talent for cultivation. She was a mere 16-year-old girl who had achieved the profound spiritual sea realm. This was something unprecedented in the history of Sword Marquis Mansion. Next, the detection of spiritual power would be the perfect opportunity for her to showcase her peerless talent. On the arena, Zhen Meng'er inched her palms closer to the spiritual power gem, gently touching it. Everyone held their breath. Has she really achieved the profound spiritual sea realm? Those famous experts from various spheres of influence were watching with earnest attention. Though they had heard that Zhen Meng'er had such an achievement, this time they would be able to witness it themselves. They would only dare to believe it if they saw it with their own eyes. A harsh violent light lit within the 10-layered spiritual power gem. The light filled the 7th layer without any suspense, then the 8th layer lit up as well. The 8th layer represented the initial spiritual sea realm. It still lit up with that dazzling violet light like the rest of the layers. Then came the 9th layer. It lit up as expected, the light just as brilliant. There were distinctions within the different layers of the spiritual power gem, and they were determined by the brightness of the violet light. Take the previous contestant, Jian Lin, as an example. When he reached the 7th step of Spirit Path, he managed to light up the 7th layer of the spiritual power gem. However, it was very dim as he was still new to the realm. But now, through the infusion of Zhen Meng'er's spiritual power, The 9th layer had lit up with the most brilliant of lights. What did this mean? The peak. The peak of the profound spiritual sea realm. She has already achieved the profound spiritual sea realm, and she is not just a newcomer to it. All of a sudden, the drill ground was in an uproar. Good. Very good. On the grandstand, Jian Xinhong rose to his feet and applauded, excitement evident in his eyes. Jian Lan laughed heartily, unable to conceal his joy. She not only achieved the profound spiritual sea realm, but even its peak. Everyone else on the grandstand also looked exceptionally amazed. Their amazement was because, even within the same level, there was a tremendous difference between the early stages and the peak of it. It would take an ordinary warrior at least several years to accumulate enough spiritual power to achieve the profound spiritual sea realm. For some, it may take even longer. Yet Jian Meng'er was only 16 years old. It was already unbelievable enough that she had achieved the profound spiritual sea realm at that age, never mind reaching the peak. Everyone felt like they were in a daze. Jian Meng'er. On the drill ground, numerous disciples of Sword Marquis Mansion were staring at the peerless and beautiful person on the platform. Besides Jian Wushuang, none of them had any desire to compete against her. The chosen one. The most beautiful one. It was none other than Jian Meng'er. Bai Chong squinted and said, "Shui Hanshin, you've really accepted a great disciple. For her to achieve the peak at 16 years old, she really has an extraordinary talent for cultivation. She's not bad." Shui Hanshin nodded, smiling. This girl does have an extraordinary talent for cultivation. Even among the many talented disciples in my Tianyuan sword sect, she's among the best. With my guidance, it won't be a problem for her to achieve gold core before turning 20. If she's willing to work hard and has good luck, perhaps another peak existence will come out of my sect. A peak existence? Everyone was stunned. Elder Shui, are you saying that Jian Meng'er will be able to achieve the yin-yang void realm in the future? Jian Xinhong seemed somewhat excited. No one doubted that Jian Meng'er was capable of forming a gold core before turning 20. However, the yin-yang void realm was truly the peak of cultivation. Even among the powerful Tianyuan sword sect, there was only a handful who had achieved it. Within Bashui Commandery, there was not even one. Was there any hope for Jian Meng'er to achieve it in the future? With her talent, nothing is impossible as long as she's willing to work hard, Shui Hanshin replied placidly. Though she sounded indifferent, it was difficult for the audience to calm themselves down. On the arena, Jian Meng'er was being watched by everyone, but her eyes were directed at Jian Wushuang. Her gaze turned chilly and she said to him, "Jian Wushuang, I've warned you. I'll let you feel complete devastation in this battle today. You're not qualified to surpass me in your entire life. Can you see it now?" Leaning on the corner, Jian Wushuang raised his head with his hands folded. His eyes turned as acute as electricity when they met Jian Meng'er's. Though no actual conversation took place, he could understand what she wanted to say through her eyes. The peak of the profound spiritual sea realm? Very good. Things will be more interesting this way. He touched his parched lips, his eyes darkening as a fire raged within him. The battle continued, yet compared to Jian Meng'er's results, the cultivation of spiritual power of the other disciples seemed even dimmer than a firefly's light. The last one, Jian Wushuang. "It's your turn," Jian Lan called, voice cold. Leaning on the corner, Jian Wushuang rolled his eyes and slowly made his ways towards the arena. His steps were slow as he put his foot one after another, attracting everyone's attention. All eyes were on him, including the famous experts. The most eye-grabbing people in this battle were doubtlessly Jian Meng'er and him. In the first round of the battle earlier, Jian Wushuang shocked everyone with the 11th move of the wave superposition sword art. Though no one had any expectations for him in this second round, no one dared to belittle him anymore at the very least. He's up on the arena. Watching Jian Wushuang walk towards the platform, a smile appeared on Jian Meng'er's face. "You achieved the peak of the 6th step of the spirit path a month ago. Now let's see how much progress you've made. Show me what you've achieved during these so-called 2 months. Chapter 26. Chapter 26, A Frightening Battle. Jian Wushuang became the focus on the drill ground. I heard this boy achieved the peak of the 6th step as early as a month ago. I wonder if he has reached the 7th step yet. Achieving the 7th step in a month? Ridiculous. The way I see it, he's probably still at the peak of the 6th step. Though his cultivation is considered decent even among us disciples here, he's still far beneath Jian Meng'er. If he challenges her without achieving the 7th step, then he's a fool. Even if he's somehow lucky enough to achieve it, challenging her who has achieved the profound spiritual sea realm is just bringing disgrace on his own head. The other disciples started discussing among themselves in whispers. Jian Wushuang eventually stopped in front of the spiritual power gem in the arena. Looking at it, he took a deep breath. 2 months' worth of earnest cultivation. He recalled the past 2 months where he dared not even spend a minute relaxing. He stayed in the cultivating room and endured the massive pressure, continuously turning the torment into something he could be proud of. In the gladiator arena, he risked his life to join the challenge so he could get his hands on all the first-class spirit cultivating pills he needed. In Nine Wolves Mountain, he fought against the bloody lion and absorbed a whole pool of primordial spiritual liquid. He had spent 2 months frantically cultivating, and now it was time to show them all his hard work. Everyone looks down on me. They all think I'm overreaching to challenge Jian Meng'er. In that case, you all better open your eyes wide and watch carefully. With a heat gleamed in his eyes, he touched the spiritual power gem with his hands. Using heavenly creation skill, the spiritual power began to pour out from within. Buzz. A dazzling violet light emerged from the spiritual power gem almost instantaneously. The 6th level of the 10-layered spiritual power gem lit up after Jian Wushuang's spiritual power flowed into it. The same brilliant light marked the 7th step of the spirit path. The 7th layer lit up. The 7th step of the spirit path? He actually achieved it. Cries of surprises resounded throughout the drill ground. Amidst the crowd was Jian Lin, who had gone pale. This time, he had reached the 7th step of the spirit path as well and thought he had finally caught up to Jian Wushuang. The constant flow of Jian Wushuang's spiritual power sparked the violet light that filled the 7th layer of the spiritual power gem, which was truly glaring, and it was still going. After the 7th layer, the violet light instantly lit up the 8th. The 8th level. Jian Lin's eyes widened in shock. The 8th layer represented the initial spiritual sea realm. The bright violet light was still going, inching towards the 9th layer. It's just as I thought. The spiritual power gem tests the cultivation of spiritual power based on its force. Though I haven't achieved the spiritual sea realm yet, I've reached the peak 8th heaven of the divine path in the heavenly creation skill. That's equivalent to the peak of the initial spiritual sea realm. The strength of the heavenly creation skill is far stronger than the similar ones. And the 9th level, Jian Wushuang's gaze turned sharp and he shouted. Light it up. Buzz. Light abruptly filled the 9th layer of the spiritual power gem. That meant the layer that represented the profound spiritual sea realm was lit. Impossible. On the arena, Jian Lan was the first to make noise. There was no trace of any smugness on his face, only a distorted expression that looked almost mad. Jian Lan, earlier you said this boy hadn't even gathered his spiritual power 2 months ago, said Sichu Qingyu, looking directly at him. Aye. Jian Lan could not find any words to retort. The 9th layer? How's that possible? Jian Xinhong's eyes were round. The profound spiritual sea realm. He actually achieved the profound spiritual sea realm? How's that possible? It must be a lie. A lie. It's completely impossible. 2 months ago, he couldn't even gather spiritual power. Everyone had gone mad. The whole drill ground had completely gone mad. The 9th level. There was finally a change in Jian Meng'er's arrogant expression that she had maintained on her beautiful face since the beginning of the competition. An unprecedented fearful expression crept onto her face. Fright. Yes, even Jian Meng'er was shocked. She was a peerless genius who had started her cultivation at the age of 12. 4 years since then, she had achieved the peak of the profound spiritual sea realm. Her achievement was remarkable. How could Jian Wushuang compare? Everyone knew Jen Wushuang was once trash who could not even gather spiritual power. Everyone knew he was just an ordinary man without a trace of spiritual power 2 months ago. Everyone thought him wanting to challenge her today was the world's biggest joke. But now, who dared to laugh at him whose spiritual power gem had lit up the 9th layer, representing the profound spiritual sea realm? Who dared to say Jen Wushuang did not qualify to challenge her? If people had found Jen Wushuang lamentable after he had surprisingly pulled off the 11th move of the wave superposition sword art in the first round, then the cultivation of spiritual power he had just presented was truly shocking. Genius. Monster. These 2 words inevitably appeared in everyone's minds. Jen Meng'er started cultivating at 12 and achieved the peak of the profound spiritual sea realm at merely 16. She could already be considered a peerless talent. Yet Jen Wushuang had only spent 2 months to go from an ordinary person to someone in the profound spiritual sea realm. What was he if not a monster? And just then, the person who everyone regarded as a monster had slowly withdrawn his palm. With his dark pupils, he swept everyone with his gaze, carrying a hint of disdain. Standing high up on the arena, Jen Wushuang looked down upon the disciples of Sword Marquis Mansion. Each of them who met his eyes could not help bowing their heads. On the entire drill ground, there was only one person who dared to meet his gaze, all while carrying a trace of stubbornness. It was Jen Meng'er. Jen Wushuang's gaze finally landed on her. There was no need for any words. In that moment, their burning battle intent to fight had risen to the surface. Jen Meng'er, get the fuck up here. His cold growl was akin to a thunderbolt, resonating through heaven and earth. The entire drill ground instantly became ablaze with excitement. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,